LAYC was founded in 1968 as a small grassroots organization in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region to address the absence of services for the emerging Latino community, offering educational and vocational activities in after school and in the summer at several locations in the community. Today, LAYC works with over 4,000 youth and families in the DC, Maryland area at 4 sites and dozens of service points through partner schools and other organizations. The mission is to empower a diverse population of youth to achieve a successful transition to adulthood through multicultural, comprehensive, and innovative programs that address youth's social, academic, and career needs. So thank you, LAYC. Handing off to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Marie, and I've worked at LAYC for a little while. And as Emily said, we've been around for a while, over 50 years, and really began, as she said, as a small emerging, really almost church basement type program that's really grown into a much larger multi-service agency. So who we serve, really, it often depends through our history on what's happening in the world. Depending on what's in the 80s, predominantly our young people were from Latin America or Central America. And today it's a little bit different. As you can see, about 50% of the young people we serve are Latino, and about 50% are African American. And then a variety of young people from just other parts of the world have been part of LAYC. The young people we serve range in age for the most part between 10 and 22. And the majority of young people we serve are in DC, but we also do have sites in Maryland, and they serve a large number of young people as well. And our move to Maryland really happened because the young people, as DC changed and gentrified, young people we serve were moving to Maryland, or their families were, and we went with them, so to speak. We're all today from the community wellness programs, which are prevention programs at LAYC, but also opportunity programs. And as I said, there are, really I think what our programs have in common is that we're teaching knowledge and skills for young people to apply those to real world projects. And I'd say a common thread that's really running through everything that we're doing is creativity, or running through LAYC's history is using creativity to highlight or raise awareness of different issues. And with that, I will pass it on to Ms. Shawna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shawna Tesfahoon. I'm the enrichment coordinator in the Teen Center at LAYC. So as we all experienced last March, there was a huge shift of continuing programming. And so we had to switch to virtual platforms, which in some cases was definitely challenging, as we noticed there was a lot of high school students who didn't have access to internet or laptops, but LAYC was able to provide a lot of them for our summer program. So going into more of the summer program, we focused on the book Stand, and this was the youth version of the original one was Stand from the Beginning, which was the adult version. And so it kind of tackled, today's political climate of racism and injustice in the United States. So we were able to have a lot of in-depth conversations, and just for a lot of young people to just voice their opinions that are often shunned out of like schools or even in their own homes. They could come into the teen center space virtually and just like really open up. The other leadership program that I'm a part of and that I teach is the club that focuses on conflict resolution, community peace building, and social justice. And so we focus on a community-based approach and to come up with more opportunities and programs that help benefit the community. So we usually tackle a few issues that they come up with on their own, like whether it's through school or at home or with friends, and trying to tackle that as a group. And so we also just allow it to be like a safe space. They're really great at open dialogue. We've had debates, we've had fishbowl discussions on a lot of issues that they're going through and facing, especially in the capital of the country.
Okay, and we'll pass on to Erika.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erika Jimmy. I'm the media coordinator for LAYC's Teen Center. So LAYC has a really robust arts and media program. We cover a range of courses for students, from radio production and music production to graphic design and visual arts. Every semester, we try to gear our new, slate of courses to students' needs, particularly their creative needs, but also to their interests. All of our courses always engage with some sort of community service element. So with radio, every month we release a monthly episode. I'm dealing with really complex topics. And our last big community service project was our census project, where students created PSAs, but also during the radio show unpacked different census myths and tried to get into the details of what are the benefits of the census and what are the fears towards the census. So yeah, we try to develop these students' creative skills for socially engaged practice. So some examples I have here, or one example I have here, is from a past episode that we did during the summer on the American Dream. So I thought it'd be fun if we just let the students speak for themselves and just listen to the first 2 minutes and 40 seconds of it, because I think they had really interesting thoughts to share. So I'll let Marie play that for you guys.
You're listening to WLAYC Teen Center Radio.
What is the American dream? Is it real or not real? Participants in the radio creative storytelling track this past summer deeply examined the symbolism of the American dream and the impact it has.
Is the American dream real?
I want to say it was real, in the sense of people had a dream of coming to America and becoming successful. But it's not real in the sense of it'll be easy or something that's achievable.
Does anybody think that the American dream has changed or not?
Well, for me, I don't even believe the American dream is real. So for that question, the answer would be no, it hasn't changed, because I don't even think it exists. From what I've been taught and told, it was just a picture that people painted for others, having that white picket fence and a big house and, your family. That's how I was always told and taught that it was seen. So I just see it as a picture that was painted. I don't think it's a real thing, because people still have to struggle to get what they want and to just survive in this country. So no, I don't think it has changed.
I want to add on. So as she said, they're trying to paint a picture, right? So I feel how people call it third world countries? I know that it's disrespectful to say that, but they call other places third world countries if they're not as technological as America, and it's trying to put them down. But I feel what if America's making it seem like it's the best place to be at, so they can get money and get technological advancements while, I don't know. I can't really explain it. They're just trying to benefit themselves so they can look like the best and make money on top of that.
I feel like you have a point. I feel like some people leave their hometowns just to come to America, and then what they perceive it to be is not even like how it is when they actually come. I feel like they would be better off in their country, working and getting not getting what they deserve, like as terms of money, but I feel like sometimes it's not worth it coming here. Do you guys think it's
Yeah, students deal with pretty complex topics, I'd say, every month, and really try to engage with their community seriously, with what's going on in politics seriously, and what's going on in their personal life seriously during the show. But the radio show is just one part. As I said, we have a lot of different programs that also help the students develop their creative skills.
Hi everyone, my name is Hope Moshi and I am the youth developer for the DC Prevention Centers for Wards 1 and 2, as well as the lead instructor for the Youth Prevention Leadership Corps. A little bit about myself that would go into LAYC is that I've been a part of the organization since I was a young youth at 14. And so I've worked through the teen center. I've been a part of volunteering at the Teen Center as well as the Youth Prevention Leadership Corps. And then I also am now an employee. So I would say the programs are really beneficial in the sense that they do really raise you to be a leader and an advocate for yourself and be an advocate for your community. So for the DC Prevention Center, the program focuses on engaging, supporting, as well as connecting DC communities to promote healthy and drug-free youth. The Youth Prevention Leadership Corps is a youth group focused program that is working on building leadership skills as well as developing prevention knowledge and skills in youth. And they do this through meeting weekly, and due to COVID, they're now meeting through Zoom, and they work on different projects that not only teach youth about drug prevention, but increase community awareness and knowledge. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of their projects can include poster creations to videos to as of recently, they're working on the creation of a podcast, all in a means to talk about drug prevention, drug misuse, and abuse. And this is all in the goal of creating a generation of youth that are leaders and agents of change in their community, who are able to advocate for their communities, especially surrounding the topic and issue of drug misuse and abuse. So there's some, you can go and watch some of the YouTube videos that they talked about specifically in the past. In the fall, they created videos talking about opioids, alcohol, marijuana, as well as healthy coping mechanisms. And again, all of this is for them to be able to gain leadership skills as well as knowledge about drugs and all of that. So, yeah.
And then just in conclusion, because we're talking about kind of pressing issues, LAYC just recently in January and February did a COVID-19 needs survey. So literally we reached out to our youth and did phone calls and went through a series of questions. So we did a total of 757 surveys with young people. And this is the beginning results of what we found out. So 50% of households have lost jobs or wages during COVID. 20% have one family member who's tested positive, and 37% are concerned about paying bills during the pandemic. And so top concerns are housing and bills, education, and health safety around getting COVID. And just students also have concerns or are having a hard time with the virtual learning. I think there's just a lot of distractions and mental health like issues as well. And just, I didn't mention, we're doing a lot of teletherapy, and we've seen quite pretty phenomenal increase in counseling at LAYC. So that's everything for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, LAYC, for sharing your work. We'll have, as mentioned, we'll have time for conversation. So I'm going to hand off to Lauren and Michelle to talk about youth circulations and introduce some of the fantastic work they are doing as well.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and really honored to be featured alongside the great work of LAYC as well. So my name is Lauren Heidbrink. I'm an anthropologist and an associate professor at California State University, Long Beach, one of the co-founders and co-editors of the website called Youth Circulations.
And I'm Michelle Statz, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Medical School in Duluth and affiliate faculty with the University of Minnesota Law School. And again, just so honored to be a part of this conversation and to work on youth circulations with Lauren. So we wanted to give you just kind of an origin story, if you will, as to how youth circulations started and what motivated it. Both of us have done, Lauren's still doing such critical and urgent work in the immigration context. My research has changed somewhat to focus more on access to justice. But both of us in 2014 were doing research with global youth and with the many really diverse stakeholders who are part of this immigration and migration apparatus in and beyond the US. And it was really important to us that we make our work much more publicly relevant, to make accessible and dynamic resources for ourselves and for others who teach on migration and global youth. And to be very candid with all of you, and I don't think this will surprise anyone on this conversation, it was also fueled by real frustration over the kinds of reductive depictions of young migrants and their family members that we were encountering. So for me, I was working in collaboration with young Chinese migrants and seeing them depicted as, inevitably victims or economic migrants or model minorities. Lauren was working and still does work with Guatemalan youth and saw many of these same, again, reductive stories. And so we decided to respond. This was happening right along with the quote unquote influx of unaccompanied migrants in 2014. And really sadly, but maybe not surprisingly, we're seeing the exact same language and many of the same depictions today in 2021.
So as Michelle mentioned, the site we established it in 2014. It was actually part this kind of labor of love and frustration, but also a class project. So I had some students, and we were looking at kind of the different discourses in the media of depictions of global youth, whether that was kind of the US media, the Mexican media, but also nonprofit reports, policy reports, and started to do a discourse analysis, right? And we curated each of these little squares. If you go to the site, our galleries, we'll show you some of the images of it. And so it really started out as a teaching tool, as a class project, and has really kind of blossomed into this incredibly thriving and diverse site. We feature the work of about 120 different scholars, activists, artists, students, young people, a wide kind of geographic range. As Michelle mentioned, much of my work is in Central America and US detention facilities for unaccompanied children. But the kind of geographic range of contributions is from all over the globe. And we've had some really great multilingual contributions in Spanish and Quiche, French, Italian, and different modalities. So some may be academics who are, I think, struggling to write for a much more public audience. We don't necessarily do that well. It's not part of our training. But artists, photographers, one of our latest pieces has a series of radio spots, poetry, personal reflections, methods, discussions. And so really kind of a broad range of resources. To date, we've had about 45,000 unique visitors. People come to the site and access the materials. And we find that it's a way of making kind of research and experience more accessible to the public. And so really trying to get at some of these discourses and tropes that we see in the media and in policy reports and in nonprofits, to really engage critically and think about kind of what the depictions they're putting forward. And this is all a volunteer effort, right? So for those of you that are academics, this is not something that, you know, goes on the you know, tenure dossier or things that are necessarily, sometimes they are, but not necessarily valued in academia. But I think something that we both feel very strongly about as publicly engaged and as public scholars, that this is part of our responsibility of translating and creating accessible information for a broad public.
So we wanted to,
okay.
Go ahead, Lauren, please.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, Michelle will show you some of the galleries that are featured on the website, just to give you a snapshot.
That's right. So, you know, you'll find this if you visit the website. It's been a real aspiration, and one that wasn't always fulfilled during the pandemic, to keep our different galleries rotated, just to demonstrate to audience members who return again and again that there are many and often very conflicting depictions of young migrants and families in the media, in policy reports, and so on and so forth. One that has remained fairly persistent is this, again, this narrative of invasion, a surge. If you turn on the news today, you'll find much of this same language and many of these very similar images. Do you want to go to the next one, Lauren? Another pervasive depiction is of global youth, and particularly those with brown or black skin, who are envisioned as criminal, delinquent, threatening, in cages. And oftentimes, and I think it's really critical that this is often when youth are depicted in places of origin, it's often understood as sort of unquestionably poor, as very desolate, as very desperate. I like to point out that no one is ever smiling here, at least in these images. And what happens is there's really an active and kind of aggressive decontextualization. So we don't have anything about foreign intervention, about free trade agreements, about the impacts of climate change. It's just poverty, and then by extension, sort of a responsibility is assigned for that.
We also see images of young people who are often disembodied, right? So body parts or the toys we assume they should be playing with. And you know, there are ethical and methodological reasons why this happens, right? So in terms of showing young people's faces, in terms of getting consent and assent. But cumulatively, what happens is not only are they kind of visually disembodied, but also disembodied in terms of not hearing their voices or their perspectives, right? It's not just a picture of their hands. It's not just a picture of a toy that's dropped on the road, but rather this kind of larger contextual and holistic approach to really understanding why they're on the move. So it's not to negate that there are ethical guidelines that we should be following, right, in terms of consent and assent, but we think that there's a way in which we can go about doing that that doesn't perpetuate this idea of children to be spoken for. I think the other narrative that we often see is quite pervasive is that young people are ideal victims, right? And this is done for very deliberate reasons, right? In terms of, you know, young people being the ideal victims are especially deserving of services, of resources, of legal protections. And one of the things I think in my work with young people who migrate from Central America is actually the average age is around 14 and a half. And yet most of these images are pictures of very young people. Again, not to say that children aren't migrating, but there is a deliberate kind of narrative in terms of picking these particular images over, say, a teenager. Michelle.
So, okay. Sorry, we had everything all worked out, but there's still Kings.
Sorry, I can do this one.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't
That's
know
okay.
mine. So, and then in the process, right, kind of taking this idea of Michelle was saying, you know, of young people as impoverished and kind of decontextualized, in the process implicating both kin and culture, right? So the idea that there are bad parents that are sending their children to the US or making poor decisions. I know in my own work in Guatemala in 2014, for example, while there was this conversation about the surge and about parents sending their children, development aid and humanitarian organizations were starting to offer parenting classes, as if parenting decisions were the reasons why young people were migrating rather than these larger structural forces. And I think also in the process, kind of demonizing and pathologizing culture, of saying, you know, it's their culture, they don't know better, and really this kind of disparaging ideas about culture leading to mobility, rather than seeing culture as an asset, right, as something that is part of the richness and the context in which young people are in place.
One thing that became really critical to me in my work was just how young people who often have less access to power, and typically children of color, how as a result of this, most of the power is then in the hands of the person who is presumed to speak for the voiceless. So I had intended to do all of my work with young Chinese migrants, and instead ended up writing a book about their attorneys, just because I don't think we shed quite enough critical light on what this looks like and why. And I think it's very important to talk about that funding context and really meaningfully discuss how limited the legal options are for global youth in the US, and then by extension their attorneys, and how competitive funding for nonprofit advocacy really is, as I know probably everyone on this conversation is very attuned to. But as a result, what happens is again, these narratives are just perpetuated, and this silencing occurs, and it's, I would argue, it's a great violence to young people and their families. There's this sort of exaltation, as you can see here, of public interest immigration attorneys, and again, that same sort of decontextualization happens, and we are left with this centralized victimhood instead of paying attention to the structures that create and benefit from the victimhood of global youth.
You know, and along those lines, you know, I've deliberately chosen these images rather than necessarily the photographs. And oftentimes I think the media focuses on spectacular moments of violence, where, you know, you might be familiar with, you know, the picture in the middle of a Honduran woman who is crossing on the US-Mexico border as Border Patrol is tear gassing her, right? She's kind of clutching her children and migrating. This is but a snapshot, right? But a moment of her experience, of the reasons why she left Honduras, and of the violence of the border and Border Patrol, and the foreign intervention and the trade agreements, all these things Michelle was mentioning. And so again, I think particularly as anthropologists, right, who have been engaged in this work for a very long time, and much of it is built on longstanding relationships, right, relationships built on trust. I think these only give you a snapshot of what's happening. And so I think part of the motivation for the site was to widen the frame, right, of to say, look, we need to look at the broader context. We need to look at this young people's experiences over time. And certainly in my work in Guatemala with young people who are deported, you know, you get the image, or you get the specific moment of their removal, but then what happens when they return to their communities? What happens 6 months later? What happens 4 years later? What happens 10 years later, right? That is also part of their experiences, and we have just shifted our gaze, right? And we're not necessarily paying attention. And so I think we're trying to bring and translate these kind of this research, these long-term experiences, people's relationships into a format that people who might not be anthropologists or might not be able to kind of engage in these long-term relationships can try to understand and get a sense of how this violence continues over time. But at the same time, how there are also counter narratives, right? And how young people are actors and young people can be depicted in other ways. And so, Michelle, I don't know if you want to take this over.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. This is where people are smiling, right? I get to bring it home in a happy way. Yeah, I'm sort of stunned that we're now in our 7th year of doing this. And as Lauren mentioned earlier, we've published over 120 visually striking and geographically diverse analyses of youth's experiences and expertise, not only as, mobile youth, but also in terms of labor and legality and home and memory, medicalization, family, design. I just sort of the spectrum of contributors and their interests has been the thing that's, I think, probably kept this project going. And I think it's important also to highlight that probably our best contributions come from young people themselves, but also from artists and activists and researchers. And throughout, with a few sort of awkward exceptions, we find that everyone is really on the same page in terms of just wanting to provide these critical counter narratives. So thinking in particular about how young people might be represented or so critically self-represent as complex, as relational, as agentive, and just to sort of reflect on those structures and those broader contexts that are so often negated or denied in prevailing narratives.
And I think again and again, both in our own work and in the work of the contributors, we find that young people are agentive, skilled, creative, transnational actors who are shaping and contributing to the communities where they live and also, in their home countries. And so I think the website is really trying to explicitly recognize and regard young people's lived experiences. And in that process, trying to democratize expertise, right? It's not just about the academic, right, or the researcher or the adults, or thinking of kind of positionality and positions of power and citizenship, right? And I think it allows us to harness our privilege and our platform to enhance the unmediated voices and critiques and kind of creative causes of young people. And so in that process, I think it's not enough for us to critique, right, with those initial galleries of what is being done wrong, right, but also to engage in this kind of creative process, and sometimes really difficult and murky and unclear kind of path in terms of how to create those counter narratives as well. But I think ultimately, we're committed to introduce the value of these counter narratives of global youth, and I think really try to push to rethink current policies and practices that claim to serve them, right? Whether it's government policies or nonprofit policies, or even how we do research, I think are really important conversations to have. And that there are opportunities to meaningfully and creatively involve, as we see with the work of LAYC, into discussions of policies and institutional practices. And so I think this website, and also kind of a final image here of, some of the pictures of our first 100 blogs, I think this work extends beyond this kind of virtual sphere, and I think in each of our research in different ways, we've tried to get more creative with our methods and with the work that we're doing as publicly engaged scholars. And so that may be interactive art exhibits, op-eds, public lectures. I just did a collaborative multimodal piece with the K-12 study guide and thinking about bringing in experiences of young migrants into kind of the K-12 classroom space. Podcasts, webinars, things like that. And, I think really just trying to encourage particularly academics, right, to get more creative. It's not enough to write in a peer-reviewed journal or to write a book that may or may not be accessible, but to really think about how do we translate the really kind of important contributions and research and really center young people's voices in our work. So maybe we'll stop there, but we're excited for the conversation. Thank you.
Well, I'm actually going to interject real quick.
Oh.
Not because I'm like determined to get the last word, but I just want to put out a call to everyone who's here, and particularly to the wonderful presenters who spoke before us. And Erika, as you were speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to somehow showcase this incredible work. So anyone who's on this as a part of this conversation or in the audience, like, please consider youth circulations. I don't think we've ever said no to someone who's reached out. And in particular, I think we'd be so honored to feature the wonderful things that are happening at LAYC. So thank you.
Thank you again, LAYC and Youth Circulations, for sharing your work. I appreciate how you're challenging the depiction of youth, but also reframing agency and creating multimedia and multi-platform ways of having conversations around pressing issues and allowing these spaces to be challenged. So thank you.